A gunshot cracked through the air, silencing the raucous crowd at the Silver Dollar Saloon as Ruby Zimmerman's delicate hands trembled on the serving tray, whiskey sloshing over the rim of the glasses. She hadn't always been a saloon girl in Butte, Montana. Just 8 months ago, she'd been the respectable daughter of a shopkeeper in Helena. But fate had other plans when influenza took both her parents within a week of each other in the harsh winter of 1883. Girl. Barked Silas Thornton, the saloon owner, his fleshy face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Those drinks ain't gonna walk themselves to table 6. Ruby nodded quickly, her chestnut hair falling from its carefully arranged style as she hurried across the sawdust-covered floor. At 22, she was still adjusting to the hard realities of her new life. The Silver Dollar was the only place that would hire her when she arrived in Butte with nothing but a small carpetbag and desperate hopes. The mining town, booming with copper and silver strikes, was no place for a woman alone, but she'd had nowhere else to go. "Here you are, gentlemen," she said softly, setting the drinks down before a group of miners fresh off their shift, their faces still streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "Why don't you sit a spell, darlin'?" One of them reached for her waist, and Ruby deftly stepped back, maintaining the polite smile that had become her armor. "Mr. Thornton needs me serving, sir. Perhaps another time." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but they were part of the careful dance she performed every night, friendly enough to keep her job, distant enough to maintain what little dignity she had left. As she turned to leave, a hand caught her wrist, the grip painfully tight. "I said sit." The miner's eyes had that glazed look Ruby had come to recognize and fear. Too much whiskey, too many hours underground, and a dangerous disregard for a woman's refusal. She glanced desperately toward the bar where Thornton deliberately looked away. He wouldn't help, he never did. "The lady said no." The voice was low, calm, and carried an unmistakable thread of authority. The miner's grip loosened as he looked up at the tall figure that had materialized beside their table. Ruby hadn't noticed the stranger enter the saloon, but now she couldn't look away. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in a dust-covered duster. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. Unlike most men in Butte, he wore a gun belt with the comfortable ease of a man accustomed to its weight. "Mind your business, stranger," the miner growled, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "The lady is my business now." The tall man shifted slightly, and suddenly the miners were very aware of the Colt revolver at his hip. "I suggest you boys enjoy your drinks and leave her be." The tension stretched between them until the miner released Ruby's wrist with a curse. The stranger touched the brim of his hat to her. "You all right, miss?" "Yes," she whispered, surprised to find her voice so unsteady. "Thank you." His eyes softened for just a moment, just doing what any gentleman ought to. Then he was gone, moving through the crowded saloon to take a seat at an empty table in the corner where he could watch the room. Ruby returned to her duties, feeling the weight of his gaze following her movements. Throughout the evening, she learned bits of information about the stranger. His name was Blackstone, a cattleman passing through on business. He ordered whiskey but barely touched it, and he declined offers from the other saloon girls who approached him with practiced smiles and invitations. As the night wore on, Ruby became increasingly aware of 3 other men watching her with particular interest. There was Marshall Wade, the wealthiest mine owner in the territory, who sat at his usual table playing cards. His eyes followed her with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to buying whatever or whoever he desired. Then there was Jeremiah Potts, Thornton's business partner and the man who had hired Ruby. He'd made his intentions clear from the beginning, suggesting that she could earn extra by spending time in his private rooms upstairs. She had refused, but his patience was wearing thin. The third was Sheriff Dalton Burke, who maintained an arrangement with Thornton that kept the saloon operating beyond legal hours in exchange for certain privileges, including first choice of the new girls. So far, Ruby had managed to avoid his direct attention by taking on extra cleaning duties when he usually came calling. And now there was Blackstone, watching her with a different kind of interest, something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Near midnight, as the crowd began to thin, Thornton caught her arm as she passed the bar. "Time we had a talk, Ruby," he said, his breath reeking of cheap cigars and whiskey. "You've been here 8 months now, and I've been patient, but you ain't pulling your weight." Ruby's stomach clenched. "I serve drinks, I clean, I work longer hours than any of the other girls. You know that ain't what I mean." His pudgy fingers dug into her flesh. "Marshall Wade's been asking about you, offering good money. Sheriff Burke too, and Jeremiah, well, he's my partner and he's been more than patient." "Mr. Thornton, please," Ruby whispered, aware of the other patrons beginning to take notice of their exchange. "We had an agreement, agreements changed." His voice hardened. "You've got a debt to me for room and board. Time to start paying it off proper. Tomorrow night, you'll entertain whoever I tell you to, or you'll find yourself on the street. And trust me, a pretty girl with no references and nowhere to go won't last long in Butte." The threat hung in the air between them. Ruby knew he was right. Women alone in mining towns either had protection or they suffered terribly. She'd heard the stories of those who tried to make it on their own. "I understand," she said, the words nearly choking her. Thornton grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Good girl, now finish your shift." Ruby moved through the rest of the evening in a daze, her mind racing with desperation. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and barely enough saved to last a week on her own. By the time the last customers had stumbled out into the cold Montana night, she was fighting back tears. As she swept the floors, she became aware of someone still seated in the corner. Caleb Blackstone hadn't left with the others. He sat watching her, his expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. "We're closed, sir," she said softly. "I know." He stood and approached the bar where Thornton was counting the night's earnings. "I'd like a word with you, Mr. Thornton." Thornton looked up suspiciously. "What about the lady?" Caleb nodded toward Ruby, who froze with the broom in her hand. "I understand she's in your employ." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "She is. What's your interest?" "I'd like to settle her debt to you, all of it." The saloon owner laughed. "She's not for sale, Cowboy, at least not permanent like. You want time with her, you pay like everyone else." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in the air did a dangerous stillness that made Ruby's pulse quicken. "I'm not looking to buy time," he said evenly. "I'm offering to pay whatever she owes you for her release from service. She walks away free and clear." Thornton studied him with new interest. "That'd be expensive. The girl's got potential. Wade's offering $300 just for a night. Name your price." Caleb's voice was calm but firm. Ruby couldn't believe what she was hearing. This stranger was offering to buy her freedom. Why would he do such a thing? Thornton seemed equally confused, but was clearly calculating the potential profit. $800 would cover her debt, room and board, and my inconvenience. It was an outrageous sum, more than most miners made in a year. Ruby's heart sank. No one would pay that much for a stranger's freedom. Without hesitation, Caleb reached inside his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. He counted out gold coins onto the bar with deliberate precision. $800. I want a signed receipt stating her debt is paid in full. Thornton's eyes widened at the sight of the gold. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled out a ledger book and scrawled in it, then tore out a page and signed it. "She's all yours, Cowboy. Hope she's worth it." Caleb took the paper and turned to Ruby, who stood frozen in shock. "Miss, if you'd like to gather your belongings, I'll wait for you outside." Ruby found her voice at last. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." His blue eyes met hers directly. "Everyone deserves a choice, madam. Right now you don't have one. I'm just evening the odds." He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Ruby staring after him. Thornton snorted. "Better hurry, girl, before he changes his mind. Some men get strange notions of chivalry. Won't last once he gets you alone." But something told Ruby this man was different. With trembling hands, she hurried to the small room above the saloon that had been her home. She packed her few possessions, 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a faded photograph of her parents, and the small sum of money she'd managed to save into her carpet bag. She changed out of her revealing saloon dress into her plainest one, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother. When she descended the stairs, Thornton was nowhere to be seen, but Jeremiah Potts emerged from the back office. His narrow face twisted with displeasure. "Leaving so soon, Ruby?" he asked, blocking her path. "Silas may have sold your contract, but he doesn't speak for both of us. I've been patient, waiting for my turn." Ruby clutched her bag tighter. "Mr. Thornton owns the saloon. If he says I'm free to go, then I am." "You ungrateful little," Jeremiah grabbed for her arm, but Ruby dodged him and hurried toward the door. "Touch her and you'll answer to me." Caleb's voice came from the doorway where he stood silhouetted against the night sky, hand resting casually near his gun. Jeremiah hesitated, then backed away. "She ain't worth dying for, Cowboy." "That's where you're wrong," Caleb said quietly. He extended his hand to Ruby. "Ready, miss." Ruby took his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his calloused fingers around hers. Outside, a horse waited, a magnificent buckskin stallion with a gleaming coat. Tied behind it was a pack mule loaded with supplies. "I don't understand," Ruby said, looking up at him in the moonlight. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you don't want to give." He secured her bag to the saddle. "I have a small ranch about 3 days' ride from here. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do next. Work as my housekeeper if you like, earn enough to move on wherever you please. Or if you'd prefer, I can take you to the stage station in the morning and buy you a ticket to anywhere you want to go." Ruby studied his face, looking for deception but finding only sincerity. "Why would you help me like this?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I had a sister once, Emily. She ended up in a place like this after our parents died. No one helped her." His jaw tightened. "I was away fighting Indians for the army. By the time I came back, it was too late." The pain in his voice was raw and real. Ruby felt her own eyes fill with tears. "I'm sorry about your sister." He nodded once, then said, "It's getting late. We should find a hotel for the night. Separate rooms," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "We'll leave at first light. Butte's not a good place for either of us right now." Ruby knew he was right. By morning, both Jeremiah and Sheriff Burke would know what had happened, and neither man would be pleased. "I'll go with you," she said softly. They found lodging at a small hotel on the edge of town. True to his word, Caleb secured 2 rooms. Before bidding her goodnight, he handed her a small revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked. Ruby shook her head. Her father had never believed women should handle firearms. "It's loaded. Just point and pull the trigger if anyone tries to enter your room uninvited." His eyes were serious. "Even me. Understand," she nodded, touched by his concern for her safety and comfort. "Thank you, Mr. Blackstone." "Caleb," he corrected gently. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. We have a long ride ahead." "Ruby," she offered in return. "My name is Ruby." A small smile touched his lips. "Good night, Ruby." In the privacy of her room, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, the revolver beside her, struggling to comprehend the sudden change in her circumstances. Why had this man, this stranger, spent a fortune to free her from Thornton's clutches? Was his story about his sister true, or was it designed to gain her trust? And even if his intentions were honorable now, what would happen when they reached his isolated ranch? Despite her doubts, Ruby felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. She fell asleep with the revolver within reach, but her dreams were peaceful for the first time since arriving in Butte. They departed before dawn, Ruby riding behind Caleb on his horse. He had offered to purchase a horse for her, but she had declined, conscious of how much money he had already spent on her behalf. The closeness required by sharing a mount was awkward at first. She had never been so near to a man who wasn't family, but Caleb maintained a respectful distance as much as possible, never taking advantage of their proximity. As they left Butte behind, Ruby felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The mining town had never been home to her. It had been a prison of circumstances. Now, riding through the Montana landscape with the sunrise painting the sky in brilliant hues, she allowed herself to feel the first stirrings of freedom. "Where exactly is your ranch?" she asked as they stopped to rest the horse around midday. "West of here, in a valley near the Ruby River." He handed her a canteen. "Ironic, given your name," she smiled, taking a drink of the cool water. "My father named me after his mother. He always said I had her spirit." "What brought you to Butte?" Caleb asked, leaning against a boulder while the horse grazed nearby. Ruby's smile faded. "My parents died last winter, influenza. They had a general store in Helena, but there were debts I didn't know about. Once everything was sold to pay the creditors, there was nothing left. She looked down at her hands. I had no other family, no skills beyond keeping house and helping in the store. I came to Butte because I'd heard the mining boom meant jobs for everyone. And Thornton hired you. She nodded. At first it was just serving drinks and cleaning up, but lately. She trailed off, not wanting to speak of the increasing pressure, the threats, the hands that grabbed and pinched when she passed. Caleb seemed to understand without her having to explain. You don't have to go back to that life. Ever, what about you? She asked, eager to change the subject. You mentioned you were in the army, 7 years with the cavalry. His expression grew distant, mostly fighting Sioux and Cheyenne, not proud of all of it. And now you have a ranch, he nodded. 5 years now. It's not grand, just a small house, a barn, about 50 head of cattle, but it's mine, free and clear. Do you live there alone? Just me and Blue, he said, nodding toward his horse. And a couple of good dogs, hired hands during calving season, but otherwise I manage. Ruby tried to imagine this solitary life. Don't you get lonely? A faint smile touched his lips. Sometimes, but I've got books and the view from my porch makes up for a lot. They continued their journey, camping under the stars that night. Caleb built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. He gave Ruby his bedroll and fashioned a makeshift barrier between their sleeping areas using saddles and supplies, a gesture of respect that touched her deeply. As they sat by the fire, Ruby found herself studying his profile, illuminated by the flickering flames. There was a quietness to him, a self-contained strength that she found reassuring. He wasn't like the loud, boastful men who frequented the Silver Dollar. When he spoke, his words had weight and meaning. Can I ask you something? She ventured. Of course. $800 is a fortune. Why would you spend that on a stranger? Caleb stared into the fire for a long moment. When I came back from the army and found out what happened to Emily, I swore I'd never stand by and watch another woman trapped that way if I could help it. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I've been saving for years to buy more land, expand the herd. But some things matter more than cattle or acres. What happened to her? Your sister, pain flashed across his face. She ended up in a place worse than the Silver Dollar. By the time I found her, the laudanum had already taken hold. She died in my arms, not even recognizing me. His voice was steady, but Ruby could hear the grief beneath the words. She was only 19. Ruby's heart ached for him, for the sister he couldn't save. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He tossed a stick into the fire. Get some rest, Ruby. We've got another long day tomorrow. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern, riding from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and eat simple meals. Ruby's muscles ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she never complained. Every mile that separated her from Butte was a blessing. They talked during these hours, sharing stories of their pasts. Ruby told him about growing up in Helena, helping in her father's store, the dreams she'd once had of marrying and having a family of her own. Caleb spoke of his time in the army, his decision to stake a claim on his land, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. By the 3rd day, Ruby realized she was no longer afraid of him. In fact, she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the fluid way he moved, the quiet competence with which he handled every task. There was something appealing about a man who didn't feel the need to broadcast his strength. It was simply there, evident in everything he did. Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill and Caleb reined in the horse. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Home. Ruby caught her breath at the sight. The valley was beautiful, a ribbon of river winding through lush grass, stands of pine and aspen providing shelter and shade. Nestled near the tree line was a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. It's lovely, she said sincerely. He seemed pleased by her reaction. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it suits me. As they approached, 2 dogs raced out to meet them, a black and white border collie and a large, shaggy mutt of indeterminate breeding. They circled the horse, barking joyfully at Caleb's return. That's Patch, he said, indicating the collie, and the big one's Bear. They're friendly. They dismounted near the cabin, and Ruby took a moment to stretch her stiff limbs. The dogs approached her cautiously, and she held out her hand for them to sniff. After a moment's consideration, Bear pressed his massive head against her skirts, demanding attention. "He likes you," Caleb observed, watching her pet the dog. "He's a good judge of character." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what Ruby assumed were bedrooms. Everything was simple but well-maintained. There were bookshelves filled with volumes, a comfortable-looking chair near the hearth, and a solid oak table with 4 chairs. The windows were large by frontier standards, letting in plenty of light. "You'll stay here," Caleb said, opening one of the doors to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom. It was Emily's room when she visited, hasn't been used much since. The room contained a narrow bed with a handmade quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath the window. Someone Emily, Ruby presumed, had hung curtains of faded blue cotton and placed a braided rug on the wooden floor. "It's perfect," Ruby said, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." While Caleb saw to the horses, Ruby explored the cabin further. The kitchen was well stocked with basic provisions: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and preserved foods. A pump at the sink provided fresh water. Everything was neat and organized, speaking to Caleb's orderly nature. When he returned, he showed her the outbuildings: a smokehouse, a root cellar, a small chicken coop currently empty. "Haven't had chickens for a while," he explained. "Never seem to have time to tend them properly." "I could manage chickens," Ruby offered without thinking. "And a vegetable garden come spring." Caleb gave her a considering look. "You planning to stay that long?" Ruby blushed, realizing she had presumed too much. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "No, don't apologize." His voice softened. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like." "I meant what I said. You have choices now. This can be a temporary place to catch your breath, or—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. That evening, Ruby insisted on preparing dinner from the supplies in the kitchen. It wasn't fancy, just fried salt pork, biscuits, and canned peaches, but Caleb ate with evident appreciation. "Best meal I've had in months," he declared, helping himself to a second biscuit. "Usually just throw something together at the end of the day." Ruby smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My mother taught me to cook, said it was an essential skill for any woman." "She was right," Caleb agreed, "though I've managed well enough on my own." "Your biscuits might disagree," Ruby teased, warming to this easy conversation. He laughed, a rich sound that transformed his face, softening the hard angles and bringing light to his eyes. "Fair point, never could get them to rise properly." After dinner, they settled by the fire. Caleb brought out a small box and placed it on the table between them. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "You should have some money of your own, independence." He opened the box to reveal several gold coins. "This is yours. Call it payment in advance for housekeeping, cooking, whatever work you choose to do here." Ruby stared at the money in shock. It was more than she would have earned in 6 months at the saloon. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will." His tone was firm but gentle. "Everyone deserves the dignity of earning their way. Consider it a business arrangement if it makes you more comfortable. But know that you're free to leave any time, with or without notice." Ruby understood what he was doing, giving her power, choices, the very things Thornton had systematically taken from her. "Thank you," she said simply, accepting the box. In the days that followed, they established a comfortable routine. Caleb rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and other ranch chores, returning mid-morning for a substantial breakfast that Ruby had waiting. She took over the household tasks: cooking, cleaning, mending his clothes when needed. In the afternoons, while he worked outside, she began planning a spring garden, reading some of his many books, or simply sitting on the porch, reveling in the peace of the valley. Sometimes, Caleb would take her riding, showing her the boundaries of his land, teaching her about cattle ranching. Ruby proved to be a quick learner, and soon she was helping with some of the lighter ranch work, feeding chickens she had convinced him to purchase, gathering eggs, even helping to bottle feed an orphaned calf. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ruby realized she had no desire to leave the ranch. She felt safe here, respected, valued for more than her appearance or ability to serve drinks. And increasingly, she found herself watching Caleb when he wasn't aware the way the sun highlighted the gold in his hair, how his shirt stretched across his shoulders as he chopped wood, the rare but wonderful sound of his laughter. She was falling in love with him. The realization came to her one evening as they sat by the fire, Caleb reading aloud from one of his books while she mended a tear in his shirt. The domesticity of the scene, the deep timbre of his voice, the contentment she felt in his presence, it all crystallized into a certainty that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Did he feel anything for her beyond kindness and perhaps friendship? He had been unfailingly respectful, never making any advances or suggesting that he expected anything beyond the arrangement they had established. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race, but he always quickly returned to whatever task was at hand. The first snow came in early November, transforming the valley into a glistening wonderland. Ruby woke to find the world outside her window blanketed in white. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, where Caleb was already building up the fire. "Good morning," he greeted her, straightening up. "Quite a snowfall overnight, might be in for a harsh winter." "It's beautiful," Ruby said, moving to the window to watch the snowflakes still falling. "Beautiful but dangerous," he cautioned. "We'll need to make sure we're prepared." "I'll ride into town today for extra supplies while the trail's still passable." The nearest town, Wilson Creek, was a small settlement about 3 hours' ride from the ranch. Ruby had visited it twice with Caleb, but he usually made the supply runs alone. "I could come with you," she offered. "Help carry things back." He considered this, then nodded. "Good idea. 2 horses can carry more than one, and you should have the chance to get anything you might need for the winter." They set out after breakfast, Ruby riding a gentle mare that Caleb had purchased for her use about a month after her arrival. The snow was several inches deep, but not yet troublesome for the horses. The world around them was hushed, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the soft breathing of their mounts. Wilson Creek was a fraction of Butte's size, just a general store, a small hotel with a dining room, a blacksmith, and a few other businesses catering to the scattered ranches and farms in the area. Unlike Butte, it wasn't dominated by mining interests, making it a quieter, more orderly place. They tied their horses outside the general store and went inside, where the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, greeted Caleb warmly. "Mr. Blackstone, good to see you, and Miss Zimmerman too." The older man smiled at Ruby. Since her first visit, when Caleb had introduced her as his housekeeper, the townspeople had treated her with polite respect. "Getting supplies before the heavy snows, I expect?" "That's right," Caleb confirmed. "Need to stock up for the winter." They selected flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt, and other staples that would see them through until spring. Caleb also purchased ammunition, lamp oil, and several new books, a surprise for Ruby, she realized with pleasure. While the men discussed local news, Ruby browsed the fabric section. She had been thinking of making curtains for the main room of the cabin, and perhaps a new shirt for Caleb as a Christmas gift. She selected a warm flannel in a deep blue that would match his eyes and some white cotton for curtains. As she approached the counter with her selections, the door opened, bringing with it a flurry of snow and a blast of cold air. Ruby froze when she saw who had entered: Sheriff Dalton Burke, one of the 4 men who had wanted her at the Silver Dollar. Burke stopped short when he saw her, recognition flashing across his weathered face. "Well, well, Ruby Zimmerman, long way from Butte." Caleb turned, instantly alert to the tension in Ruby's posture. "Can I help you?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. Burke assessed Caleb with a lawman's practiced eye, noting the gun at his hip and the confident way he carried himself. "Just saying hello to an old acquaintance." His gaze returned to Ruby. "Last I heard, you left town rather suddenly." Thornton was quite put out. "Miss Zimmerman works for me now," Caleb said evenly. Her arrangement with Thornton was settled in full. Burke's eyebrows rose. "So you're the cowboy who paid her debt," caused quite a stir back in Butte, especially with Jeremiah Potts. He seemed to think he had some prior claim. "He didn't," Ruby said, finding her voice. "Mr. Blackstone helped me when no one else would. I'll bet he did." Burke's insinuating tone made the innocent words sound vulgar. Caleb's expression hardened. "We've made our purchases, Mr. Jenkins," he said without taking his eyes off Burke. "We'll be on our way now." The storekeeper, sensing the tension, quickly tallied their items. Caleb paid, and they loaded their supplies into saddlebags and packs for the horses. As they prepared to leave, Burke followed them outside. "Word travels even to small towns like this," he said conversationally. "Jeremiah Potts has been asking around about a tall cowboy and a pretty brunette from the Silver Dollar, offering a reward for information." Ruby's stomach clenched with fear. Caleb's face revealed nothing, but she could sense his anger in the set of his shoulders. "Is there some law against helping a lady start a new life?" Caleb asked quietly. Burke shrugged. "No law, but Potts seems to think you stole something that belonged to him." "He's a persistent man, from what I hear." "Miss Zimmerman doesn't belong to anyone," Caleb replied, his voice dangerously soft. "And you might want to remind Mr. Potts that Montana is a big territory. Easy for a man to get lost in it if he comes looking for trouble where he isn't wanted." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Burke nodded slightly. "Just passing along information as a courtesy." He tipped his hat to Ruby. "Miss Zimmerman, enjoy your employment." They watched him enter the hotel across the street before mounting their horses. The ride back to the ranch was tense and quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Only when they were unpacking the supplies in the safety of the cabin did Ruby speak. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep." Caleb looked at her in surprise. "You haven't done anything wrong, Ruby. But Potsy's a dangerous man, and now he knows where I am." "No, he doesn't," Caleb corrected her. "Burke was fishing for information. He doesn't know for certain that you're still with me or where my ranch is located." He put down the sack of flour he was holding and approached her. "But even if Potts does come looking, he'll find more than he bargained for. I fought Sioux warriors for 7 years. I'm not afraid of a saloon owner with delusions of ownership over a free woman." His confidence should have reassured her, but Ruby couldn't shake her fear. "I should leave, go somewhere else, somewhere they won't think to look for me." "Is that what you want?" Caleb asked quietly. To leave, she looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her over these months. "No," she admitted, "but I don't want to put you in danger because of me, Ruby." He took her hands in his, and she realized it was the first time he had touched her this way, deliberately, intimately. "I knew what I was doing when I paid your debt in Butte. I knew men like Thornton and Potts don't let go easily, but you're worth protecting, worth fighting for if it comes to that." The conviction in his voice made her breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why am I worth all this trouble to you?" Caleb's blue eyes held hers steadily. "Because from the moment I saw you in that saloon, trying to maintain your dignity while serving drinks to men who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, I knew you were special. Brave. Good." He hesitated, then added softly, "And because these past months with you here have been the happiest of my life." Ruby felt tears welling in her eyes. "Truly, truly." His hands tightened around hers. "I don't want you to leave, Ruby, not because of Potts or anyone else. But I want it to be your choice, always your choice." In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, Ruby made her choice. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. It was brief, almost chaste, but when she pulled back, Caleb was looking at her as though she had given him the greatest gift imaginable. "I choose to stay," she said simply. "With you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He touched her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." That evening, as they sat before the fire, their relationship shifted into something new. Caleb told her about his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, adding more land, perhaps building a larger house someday. Ruby shared her own hopes: a proper garden, chickens, and perhaps other livestock, making this place truly a home. They didn't speak directly of marriage, but it hung in the air between them, a future possibility that both recognized and welcomed. For now, it was enough to acknowledge their feelings, to know that they had chosen each other. The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days. Ruby found she didn't mind the confinement. The cabin was warm and snug, and Caleb's company never grew tiresome. They read together in the evenings, played chess. He taught her the game, and she proved a quick study and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, respectfully. Kisses by the fire, hands held across the table, occasional embraces that grew longer and more intimate as their comfort with each other increased. But Caleb never pressed for more, and Ruby appreciated his restraint. After the crude propositions and grabbing hands at the saloon, his gentle courtship was healing. Christmas arrived with a blizzard that howled around the cabin for 3 days. When it finally cleared, the world outside was transformed into a gleaming white expanse, untouched and pristine. They exchanged simple gifts: the blue flannel shirt she had made for him, a beautiful silver hairbrush he had purchased months earlier in Butte, intending it for this occasion. "It was my mother's," Ruby said, touching the bristles reverently. "Not this exact one, but very similar. She used to brush my hair every night when I was a little girl." Caleb smiled, pleased by her reaction. "I noticed you didn't have one, thought you might like something. Pretty? It's perfect," she assured him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "Thank you." January brought more snow and bitter cold. They kept the fires burning constantly, and at night Bear and Patch slept near the hearth, adding their warmth to the room. Ruby worried about the cattle, but Caleb assured her they were hardy stock, accustomed to Montana winters. "They know to shelter in the trees during the worst weather," he explained. "And I put out extra hay when I can reach them. They'll be thin come spring, but most will make it." February arrived with a temporary thaw that allowed Caleb to check on the herd and Ruby to visit Wilson Creek for supplies. They hadn't anticipated needing thread for mending, more coffee, a new axe handle to replace one that had broken. There was no sign of Burke, and no one mentioned Potts or any inquiries from Butte. Ruby began to hope that perhaps the danger had passed, that Potts had given up his search, but her hope was premature. March brought the first real signs of spring, patches of ground appearing through melting snow, birds returning to the valley, days growing noticeably longer. Ruby started seedlings indoors for her garden, and Caleb prepared for calving season, which would begin in earnest by month's end. One afternoon, as Ruby hung laundry on a line stretched between the cabin and a nearby tree, she heard Patch barking frantically. The border collie was trained to alert them to strangers approaching the property. Heart pounding, she hurried inside for the revolver Caleb had insisted she keep nearby at all times. He was out checking on a pregnant heifer that was showing signs of early labor, too far away to hear the dog's warning. From the cabin window, Ruby saw 3 riders approaching from the east, the direction of Wilson Creek. She recognized the middle figure immediately, Jeremiah Potts, his narrow face unmistakable even at a distance. The men with him were strangers to her, but the rifles they carried made their purpose clear. Ruby's first instinct was to hide, but she quickly dismissed the thought. If they had come this far, they knew she was here. Hiding would only delay the inevitable. Instead, she stepped onto the porch, the revolver held steady in her hand as Caleb had taught her during the winter months. "That's far enough," she called when the riders were within earshot. "State your business." Potts reined in his horse, studying her with cold eyes. "Well, well. The saloon girl plays at being a frontier woman. How charming." "I am a frontier woman," Ruby replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And you're trespassing on private property?" "I've come to collect what's mine," Potts said, dismounting despite her warning. The 2 men with him remained on horseback, rifles ready. "You left Butte without fulfilling your contract, Ruby. That makes you a thief." "My debt was paid in full," she said. "Mr. Thornton accepted payment and provided a signed receipt. I owe you nothing." Potts took a step forward and Ruby raised the revolver higher. He paused, reassessing the situation. "Where's your cowboy protector? Did he tire of you already?" "Mr. Blackstone will return shortly," Ruby said, praying it was true. "I suggest you leave before he does." Potts laughed. 3 armed men against 1 cowboy. I like those odds." He turned to his companions. "Search the outbuildings, find Blackstone." As the men dismounted, Ruby made a split-second decision. She fired the revolver into the air, hoping the sound would carry to wherever Caleb was working. All 3 men ducked instinctively, then Potts straightened with a snarl. "Stupid girl, you just wasted your 1 shot." She has 5 more, came Caleb's voice from behind them. He had circled around through the trees, approaching from an angle they hadn't anticipated. His rifle was aimed steadily at Potts. "And I have plenty to spare." The 2 hired men froze, caught between their employer and the threat behind them. Potts turned slowly to face Caleb, his hand hovering near his own gun. "Blackstone. Finally, we meet properly." "You're on my land, threatening a woman under my protection," Caleb said, his voice deceptively calm. "I'd say that's improper by any standard." "The woman belongs in Butte," Potts insisted. "She has obligations." The only obligation she had was a debt, which was paid in full. Caleb's rifle didn't waver. "Now you and your men are going to mount up and ride away, and if I ever see you within 50 miles of this ranch again, I'll shoot you on sight." One of the hired men shifted nervously. "Mr. Potts, maybe we should." "Shut up," Potts snapped. "He's bluffing. He won't shoot unarmed men." "I was with the 5th Cavalry," Caleb said quietly. "Fought at the Rosebud and a dozen smaller actions, killed more men than I care to remember, so test me if you want, Potts, but don't call it a bluff." Something in his voice, the cold certainty perhaps, or the hint of regret for past violence, convinced Potts that Caleb wasn't bluffing. His face tightened with anger, but he nodded to his men. "Mount up," he ordered. "This isn't over, Blackstone." "It is over," Caleb corrected him. "Ruby Zimmerman is going to be my wife. And if you or anyone else from Butte comes looking for her again, they'll answer to me and to the law. Sheriff Burke may look the other way for a price, but Judge Hollister and Helena is a different matter. I'm sure he'd be interested to hear about the business arrangements at the Silver Dollar." Potts paled slightly at the mention of the judge, known throughout the territory for his harsh sentencing of those who exploited women. "You're making a powerful enemy, Cowboy." "I've had worse," Caleb replied evenly. "Now ride out, and spread the word in Butte that Ruby Zimmerman is under my protection permanently." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, Potts turning once to glare back at them with naked hatred. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Caleb lower his rifle and hurry to Ruby's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. Ruby nodded, still clutching the revolver in trembling hands. "You came back just in time. I heard the shot." He gently took the gun from her and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "You were brave to face them like that." She buried her face against his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of him: leather, pine, and something uniquely Caleb. "I was terrified, but I couldn't hide. This is my home now." "Our home." His arms tightened around her. "I meant what I said to Potts," he murmured against her hair, "about you being my wife, if that's what you want." Ruby looked up at him, seeing the love and concern in his blue eyes. "Is that a proposal, Caleb Blackstone?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not a very romantic one, I'm afraid. I had planned something better, maybe a ride to the ridge where you can see the whole valley, or during that picnic we talked about once the wildflowers bloom." "This is perfect," she assured him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "And yes, I want to be your wife." They were married in Wilson Creek 2 weeks later, with the local minister officiating and Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins as witnesses. Ruby wore a new dress of pale blue muslin, and Caleb wore his best shirt, the one she had made him for Christmas. It was a simple ceremony, but as they exchanged vows, Ruby felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. That evening, returning to the ranch as husband and wife, Ruby felt no nervousness about what was to come. Their courtship had been unconventional in many ways, but it had given them time to know each other, to build trust and genuine affection before passion. When Caleb carried her across the threshold of their cabin, she went willingly, eagerly into his arms. Later, lying beside him in the bed they now shared, Ruby traced the scar that ran along his collarbone, a memento from his cavalry days. "Do you think Potts will come back?" she asked, giving voice to the worry that had lingered despite their happiness. Caleb covered her hand with his own. "No. Men like Potts are cowards at heart. They prey on the vulnerable, not on those who can fight back. And he knows I meant what I said about Judge Hollister." "I never thought I'd find this," Ruby confessed softly. "After my parents died, I thought I'd spend my life alone, struggling to survive. And I never thought I'd find someone who could make this place feel like a real home," Caleb replied, pulling her closer. "We saved each other, Ruby." As spring blossomed into summer, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Ruby's garden yielded vegetables in abundance, and her chickens provided eggs and occasional meat. Caleb's cattle thrived, with a better calving season than he'd had in years. Together, they repaired fences, painted the cabin, and began planning an addition to accommodate the family they hoped to have. Word spread throughout the territory about the rancher who had rescued a saloon girl from Butte and made her his wife. Some whispered disapprovingly about Ruby's past, but most were moved by the romance of their story. And as the months passed without any sign of Potts or his men, the incident began to seem like a distant nightmare rather than a present threat. In late October, as the aspen leaves turned golden and the first frost silvered the grass in the mornings, Ruby shared news that completed their happiness. She was expecting a child, due in the spring. Caleb's joy was boundless. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, then immediately apologized and set her down gently, afraid of harming her or the baby. "A child," he said wonderingly, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "Our child." Ruby covered his hand with hers. A new beginning. The winter of 1884-1885 was milder than the previous one, allowing Caleb to make regular trips to Wilson Creek for supplies and check on the herd more frequently. Ruby's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing to accommodate the new life growing within her. As her condition became more apparent, Caleb grew increasingly protective, insisting on handling the heavier household tasks and fretting when she went outside in the cold. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Ruby teased him one evening as he built up the fire to ensure she wouldn't catch a chill. "Humor me," he replied with a sheepish smile. "I've never been a father before. I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing." She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "You're doing perfectly, and you're going to be a wonderful father." May brought their son into the world, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and a head full of dark hair like his mother's. They named him Daniel, after Ruby's father, and William as a middle name to honor Caleb's grandfather. Holding his son for the first time, Caleb felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "He's perfect," he whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "Thank you, Ruby, for everything." As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered along with their family. Caleb hired 2 permanent hands to help with the expanding herd, building a bunkhouse for them near the barn. Ruby took over the bookkeeping for the ranch, revealing a talent for figures that surprised and delighted her husband. Together, they transformed what had been a bachelor's homestead into a thriving family ranch. 2 years after Daniel's birth, Ruby gave birth to twin girls Emily and Rose. Caleb, who had feared having daughters after what happened to his sister, found his concerns melting away as he held the tiny, perfect babies in his arms. They would grow up differently than his sister had protected, cherished, with both parents to guide them. By the time Daniel was 5 and the twins were 3, the Blackstone Ranch was known throughout the territory as one of the most successful operations of its size. Caleb and Ruby had added substantially to the original property, built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, and established themselves as respected members of the community. Occasionally, travelers from Butte would pass through Wilson Creek, and sometimes they brought news. They learned that Silas Thornton had died of apoplexy in 1887, and that Sheriff Burke had been voted out of office after a scandal involving misappropriated funds. Of Jeremiah Potts, they heard nothing for years, until one day a cattle buyer mentioned casually that Potts had been killed in a saloon fight in Deadwood, stabbed by a woman he had tried to force into working for him. "Seems fitting," Caleb remarked that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their children playing in the yard under the watchful eyes of Bear's descendants, that his end came at the hands of a woman he tried to control. Ruby nodded, thinking of how close she had come to a similar fate. "I wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't come to the Silver Dollar that night." "But I did," Caleb said, taking her hand, "and you were brave enough to trust me." "Best decision I ever made," Ruby said softly. 10 years after their wedding, as they celebrated with a gathering of friends and neighbors at their prosperous ranch, Ruby found a moment alone with her husband. They stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, the same spot where he had once planned to propose. "Are you happy, Caleb?" She asked, though she knew the answer. He pulled her into his arms, still as strong and vital at 40 as he had been at 30. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he told her honestly. "You gave me a family, Ruby, a purpose beyond just surviving." She smiled up at him, the love between them only deepened by the years. "And you gave me freedom, then chose to share it with me. I couldn't ask for more." As they watched the sun setting over the land that was their legacy to their children, Ruby thought about the journey that had brought her here from the darkest moment of her life, in a Butte saloon, to this abundance of joy and love. 4 men had wanted her as a saloon worker, but Caleb had seen her true worth, paid her way out, and brought her home. Not as a possession, but as a partner. Not as an obligation, but as the love of his life. And in that choice, they had both found redemption, purpose, and a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together.